to have some awesome people here with me to just chat about the frequently asked questions that we all get from first-time home buyers or home buyers alike. So I'm Liz. I'm a real estate attorney with Liggers and Associates, focusing on buyer and seller representation. Emily, how about you?
I'm Emily Gonzalez. I'm a real estate agent with the Proper Nest Real Estate.
Hello, hello. My name is Barron, and I'm a loan officer with Cross Country Mortgage. Liz, a question that I get all the time whenever I'm talking to my clients, not to just like jump right in, but it's something that I'm genuinely curious about, is people see on my closing costs title insurance every single time. Do you think the buyer should have it?
100%.
Really?
Definitely. So I personally am a real estate attorney. This is all I do all day long. And for any house I purchase title insurance. So just to kind of break it up a little bit, there are two different kinds of title insurance. Generally, if your buyer is financing, obviously, if they're meeting with you, they are. So if they're getting a mortgage, they're going to be paying for two different kinds of title insurance if they choose. So one is not optional, and that's lender's title insurance. So that's the policy that's going to protect your rights as a lender in financing the property. Not optional. So unfortunately, as a buyer, you have to pay for the lender's protection. The second is owner's policy. That's obviously the policy that's going to protect the home buyer. It's optional, so they don't have to pay for it, but it's super important in my opinion. And that's because what the policy is going to protect is stuff that is unforeseeable or undiscoverable at the time of the closing. So when we're doing our title research, obviously if I miss something, that's malpractice, they sue me. But the title policy is going to protect things that I wouldn't be able to see. For example, if we're looking at a deed signed at the registry of deeds, I'm assuming the person who signed it was truly the seller. But what if it wasn't? So I don't, also, what if that person didn't have sound mind? I don't know. And then, in the future, an heir knocks on the door saying, my uncle, it wasn't in his right mind when he signed that document. And all of a sudden you have a title issue. So I could go into so many things that title insurance protects. But it's definitely one of those questions that I get the most because it is costly, but for peace of mind, I think it's worth it. Especially because with an owner's policy, you pay for it once. You don't have to pay for it again. So that once that sort of is explained to a buyer, it usually helps ease their mind.
I actually have a follow-up question, if you don't mind. How is that different from the lender's title insurance policy that is mandatory?
So the owner's policy is a curative policy. So if there's an issue, the policy is there to cure the problem. Let's say you get that person who knocks on your door, say, hey, I was an heir that was left off of my, grand uncle's estate. The title company will put its resources to protecting your rights as the homeowner and potentially go to court to resolve that, file whatever is necessary, motions, etc., to correct the title, so curative documents. So all of those things are included in the owner's policy, whereas the lender's policy is not one that actually cures defects. So it's just there. So in the event that the title to the property is lost, let's say the property gets foreclosed upon, or the title to the homeowner is no longer valid, for example, the lender will be recouped their loan proceeds that remain. So that question comes up a lot. They're like, oh, well, the lender's going to take care of it. Obviously, no, they wait for their check. What you really need is the owners to have that curative effect. But that's such a great question because that's really important nuance. So actually going into like the history of the property, I think is an important aspect. But before we even get to that, I feel like one of the aspects that clients always ask me, especially after their offer's been accepted, is should I actually even inspect this property? And Emily, I know you have definitely opinions on whether you should get a home inspection or not. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
Yes, I do. So my answer to that is always yes. Yes, you should absolutely get a home inspection, but obviously it comes down to what that individual buyer wants to do. So whatever my buyer client wants me to do, I'm going to do, but I'm still going to advise them. So obviously, when you're in a competitive market, which we are still in right now, and you're in a multiple offer situation, the sellers will more likely than not like to see a clean offer. So an offer that comes in usually at or above asking, no contingencies or very few contingencies. And an inspection is a big contingency. So sometimes folks that put in an offer and they don't have an inspection on there, they completely waive it, or maybe they have informational only, their offer might be deemed more, desirable. However, this doesn't mean that you should forego the inspection if that's important to you. I'm a firm believer that we can still get an offer accepted even with an inspection, and there's ways around this too. So you can do an informational only inspection, which basically is like, hey, we're just getting the inspector to come in. Sorry, my cat would also like to join us. If you see her, my apologies. The, you know, we're going to have the inspector come in, but we're not going to come back to the seller for repairs. And we know that this is just for our peace of mind. You can also try and do a pre-offer inspection. So depending on how competitive the offer situation is, you can possibly get in before you submit the offer. Also a way to have peace of mind so that you know what you're getting into and everything's presented to you. And then, of course, you can do the full inspection, which is, allowing you to go back to the seller usually if there's anything majorly wrong and you want them to fix it. So oftentimes, if my clients do that, we'll have like a cap and say, okay, the buyer, will cover up to $10,000-$15,000 in repairs if necessary. But above that, we want the seller to cover that or give a credit. And that happened to me when we bought our house. The sellers disclosed that the roof was old and we had an inspection and the roof cost was going to be over $15,000, which we said we'd cover. So they offered a credit for us. So long answer, I think you should always get an inspection, but I've had plenty of buyers that have waived it because they felt comfortable with the house or they knew they were going to do so much work on the house that it really was kind of moot for them. So yes, I will always say you should, but we'll have a discussion about it. So kind of off of that a little bit, I kind of wanted to go back to what we were talking about earlier though. And speaking of, closing credits and the things that you might see at the closing table, like closing credits for repairs and things. Laura, what is usually rolled into closing costs?
Yeah, I think it's important to talk about closing costs more like upfront in the process, because especially for first-time home buyers, everyone thinks about, oh, I have to save for a down payment and how much do I need to put down? And we talk about those things a lot. But there's also this other thing that gets kind of like misconstrued until the very end, and it's closing costs. And your closing costs are all of the costs that are associated with actually making your loan happen and putting it together. So during the loan process, your credit report is run. There's a fee for that. We run a flood certificate on the property. There's a processing and underwriting fee. You pay lovely people like Liz and her team for their services. There's the title insurance, the lender's title insurance. We set up your first year of homeowners insurance. There's property taxes. Depending on the state that you live in, you might have to pay a portion of your state transfer tax. So there's a lot of things that you just kind of like don't think about and aren't intuitive to first-time home buyers when they're buying a house that it actually takes to make your purchase transaction happen between the buyer and seller. There's a whole team supporting you. So all of those things support your closing costs, and they do look very different whether you're a seller or whether you're a buyer. So what we do at Cross Country and what really any lender will do is once your loan is in process, we provide an itemized list of what your closing costs will be. And often before I even at the offer stage, a lot of times when I'm talking to my clients, I split up, here's what your down payment's gonna be. Here's what I'm estimating your closing costs to be based on this purchase. Here's your total investment into this. How does this feel for you? And we talk about things like that. And that's kind of how we decide whether or not a house is right to put an offer together at all.
Which is so important, just to step in for a second, because I feel like a lot of loan officers don't take the time prior to the offer submission to talk through the costs associated with it. Again, like exactly what you said, like people focus on the down payment and maybe monthly payment estimate, but like not necessarily the other funds that are gonna take to get to that closing table. And it's so refreshing that you do that, and clients have been so happy knowing that they're going into an accepted offer with like assurance of what they're going to be sort of in for at the closing table.
Totally, and it's super important because your loan can be denied if you're short the funds to close.
Yeah,
So sometimes that becomes part of the offer strategy, is like, hey, this house is great. We need $5,000 more to make this loan work. Can you get a gift? Do you have any other accounts that I don't know about? Can you take a loan against your 401k? Can you get a seller credit? You know, there's all different things that you can do to make sure that your closing costs are covered. And those are things that we look at the pre-approval stage. So it's really important to look at those things like upfront at the very beginning of the process, and making sure that it really aligns in like part of the picture of whether or not a house is truly the right house for you. I'm a big believer in like what's meant for you will not pass you by. Everything kind of has to work holistically and come together in the end. And if the numbers don't work, something else will come along that will. I like really, really believe that. And I feel like that has to be the hardest part of Emily's job for in my opinion, is like working with people and navigating, finding these things and falling in love with a house, or maybe warming up to one that they didn't think was going to be right in the beginning. So I'm just like wondering, how do your clients like kind of decide whether or not a house is the one for them?
It's definitely a process. And I think I'm gonna go back to what you said. The number one thing that I like to start with is to make sure that we're getting off on the right foot financially, of the best foot possible financially. So usually when I set them up on an MLS search and we start to look at homes, I want to know that they're already pre-approved, so that if they do fall in love with a home, we know that we can comfortably put an offer in and even escalate that. So we might want to start on the lower end usually of their pre-approval, so that if we need to go up because they really want this house and this is their house, they feel it, then we can do it. So starting off financially on the right foot, knowing they can cover that monthly mortgage payment every month if they're going with a loan. But beyond that, I think once we have that checked off, the thing to consider, how if a house is right for you, it really comes down to a couple of other things. It's, does it fit your lifestyle and your goals? For some people, this is, they want to move into a place to start getting equity and to stop renting. So it's going to be shorter term for them, a condo or something. Other people, they want to move into a house that they can grow into and have a family and have a yard for their dog and things like that. So that's their lifestyle. Those are their goals. So we're going to focus our search based on that. But also, it really comes down to, I think, how does it feel? So my buyers, more often than not, they know a house is right for them based on like a gut feeling. Now, obviously, we're going into a house that they can afford. We've done all of that legwork, but usually they will tell me after we've seen a couple of homes, or maybe only one or two, yeah, this one feels comfortable. I want to put an offer in. This has everything we're looking for, or at least has like most of the things we're looking for in a place. So that sounds really simple, but honestly, it comes down to that. I'm not here to tell my buyers what they should be looking for or what house they should be buying. That's up to them. I'm here to advise them and hold their hands. They're driving the bus. I'm just kind of giving them tips from the backseat or like next to them, and making sure that they're making a good investment, depending on what they've told me they want, what their deal breakers are, what they can afford and are comfortable with. Do they want a turnkey home, or are they super into doing cosmetic fixes and whatnot? And we're going to look for that. Do they want to be close to public transportation? Is that a deal breaker because they hate driving? We're going to look for that, and I'm going to help steer them in the right direction, but they ultimately have to tell me what they're comfortable with. So I think, they're always in control. I'm just here to make sure that it is fitting the parameters that they're telling me that they want and that they're getting the best deal out of it and making a good investment.
And I think
It's interesting how those things kind of like change and shape over time. And you're right, you do make decisions with like your head, your heart, and your gut in these processes. You have to. It's like some combination of all of those. I remember when I was buying my house, I was all over Pinterest, like one does, you know, and I was looking at all of these homes and I loved all of the decor that was like all in gray. And I would go into these homes that were newer construction and everything was gray in the kitchen. And I walked into them and I was like, for me personally, photographs beautifully, but once I got in there, it didn't feel like home to me. And even though the price was right, the bedrooms were right, the year it was built was right, the yard was right, I was like, I don't feel it here. This doesn't feel like my home. And that became a deal breaker. And those things kind of like ebb and flow throughout the course of your home purchase.
Yeah, it's really always
100%.
interesting to see like where a client starts and like where the client ends up. But often it's that combination of the three, the brain, the heart, and the gut for sure. And it's also interesting to just, I have a lot of clients that they'll tell me the story, because that's one of the things I like to do. Like the first thing, like, what happened? How did you get here? Because usually I get involved a little bit later. Like, what happened? How long have you been searching? Whatever. And there have been so many transactions where I've heard, I lost the offer, but that was my house. And then an inspection or something happened with the other buyer that hadn't gotten that offer accepted. And then they came back to me. And it's because that house is for them. It was their house. It just took an extra step to get there. So it's always interesting.
Exactly.
When
Exactly.
people find you and you're having those conversations, because you do come along a little bit later in the process, are you typically getting connected with people directly? Is a bank usually connecting you? And like, what is the difference between if you're representing maybe the lender or if you're representing the buyer? What does that look like?
Yeah, great question. So it really depends. So I have great relationships with you ladies and other agents and loan officers that depending on that relationship, they'll introduce me either, depending on the client. Some of my agents will actually introduce me before an offer has been accepted, because especially in today's market, they want like to walk through potential language that they're adding in, or, hey, these are, very nervous buyers. Like they just want to understand the whole process before they go in. And I love having those conversations because it makes it easier too, because once an offer is accepted, like the buyer understands that's my lender, that's my attorney, that's my home inspector, whatever it is, they already kind of know who everyone is, versus like that speedy, like as soon as an offer is accepted, the overwhelming sense of having to like hire all these people. So typically I do like to get involved earlier if possible, but generally will get introduced by either the realtor or the loan officer. But if that buyer is getting a mortgage for the purchase, typically in the majority of situations, we're kind of playing a dual representation role. One where we're what we would call buyer representation, and one is lender representation. So they're two distinct roles, although it's one person doing it. Sometimes we are in situations where maybe the bank has what we would call the closed list. Maybe they have only one law firm in Massachusetts that they'll allow to close their loans. And in that situation, sometimes we'll just be a buyer attorney, but typically, again, it's the sort of dual role. And on the buying side, what we're doing is the negotiation of the purchase and sale agreement, being that person's advocate through the process, answering questions as they come up, tracking important deadlines like your mortgage approval date, reading the mortgage commitment letter to make sure everything looks good, walking through all the loan figures with them, all of those aspects. And then on the bank side, we're kind of doing two specific roles. One is certifying title. So we're doing a research of the title, making sure that everything looks good, and certifying to the bank that it's clear and marketable, and then acting as what we call like an escrow agent at closing, where essentially all the money will flow through the bank attorney's account that day. So the buyer and the bank are assured that, like, if the seller owes a mortgage, if the seller owes back taxes, like all of those outstanding liabilities get paid from our control of the money before the seller gets their funds. So it's not like we're going to trust the seller to like pay off their debt and give them all the money that that the loan provided or the buyer provided. Everything comes to us first, and we distribute. But typically the good thing about the dual representation is often that comes with a discount of fees, which is great. And also the ability to like not have too many cooks in the kitchen, which sometimes gets a little bit, frustrating for just the buyer experience. Cause it's like, what attorney am I talking to? Am I talking to a bank attorney? Am I talking to my attorney? But being able to have one attorney kind of, or law firm handle all those aspects just makes it a little bit easier, from sort of like a consumer standpoint, if that makes sense. And on that
somebody,
point, yeah, go ahead.
Oh yeah, are we? I was gonna say, so yeah, you basically answered my question that I had. Like,
Yeah.
if someone's like, "Why do I need an attorney?" I think you pretty much outlined it. Like,
Yeah. So exactly, like covering all those aspects of what we do. The big thing that I always will just say, to people out there who are, getting referred to an attorney, make sure that that attorney is also working for you, because you should be receiving, as a buyer, an engagement letter from that attorney that will outline specifically their relationship with you. Because if they don't have that relationship with you, maybe they're just doing like a favor to like take a look at a PNS versus actually negotiate it. So maybe they're looking at the price, the names, things are spelled right, but they're not actually advocating for you, as your attorney. So you really want to make sure that, if you're referred in, from the loan officer, for example, because they're going to conduct the closing, that you've also had a conversation with them to see if they can assist you on the buyer representation too. It's super, super important, because I've had a lot of situations where I get deals that, PNS went south because they actually didn't have representation they thought they did, and it's just a confusing turn of events for buyers. And that's obviously not anybody's like intent. Everybody wants to make sure buyers are feeling comfortable, and knowing what they're signing at the end of the day. And I feel like one of the things that a lot of buyers, for the most part, besides like what is the attorney involved, is also like just today's market and like interest rates, I feel like is just like the biggest topic of conversation, besides like what am I spending, how am I getting my house, but like what are rates like, what's happening? What are your thoughts, Laura?
So I'm just gonna be brutally honest here, and I'm gonna tell you that if anyone in November of 2023 tries to tell you that they know exactly what's going to happen with interest rates, that they know the timing of things, that they can predict when you'll be able to refinance, when they go down, should you wait to buy, they're wrong. They might get it right through luck, but really the way that we make decisions is based on historical data. And I can tell you that 2021, 2020 years, that global pandemic, no one could have predicted. We don't have any data to base those years off of. We made decisions during those years, as an industry and like on a federal level, that we're now suffering the consequences of today. And as a result, 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, years that we can't base anything off of. So it's very difficult for me to tell you, because historical data on inflation levels that would indicate mortgage rates come down hasn't impacted us this way this year. The top economists, who it's their job day in and day out to kind of make these decisions and lead the industry in these things, have been wrong multiple times this year. So the thing that I can say on interest rates is, while I might not have a minimum credit score and I can help people across the board with loans, work on your credit, keep your liabilities low, work on your savings, because all of those things are going to get you access to the best interest rate of the day, and set yourself up for success in your home purchase. Because obviously the lower your interest rate is, the lower your principal balance is, the less interest rate can be applied to it. So those things are going to help you in the long run. But in terms of like timing the market and should you wait to buy, my answer is, if you can afford to buy today, then you should not wait. Because in the long run, you're missing out on the opportunity to capture equity in your home, like Emily was talking about, and like investing and building wealth. Even if you're planning on living in your home for the next 30 years, it's still an investment into your future. I just read a stat yesterday that in Essex County, Massachusetts, which is where I happen to live, home values are expected to appreciate by 24% in the next 5 years. That's our median home value is $699,000, so that's $171,000 in 5 years. Like, not many of us will have the ability to save $171,000 over the next 5 years. And if you're just starting out and your home is $300,000, that's $72,000. So it's a lot of money. It's a big investment. And so if you can do it now, why would you want to wait? And then the other thing that I'll say about waiting for rates to come down is, as rates come down, the number of people that actually qualify for a mortgage increases. What happens with supply and demand? The competition becomes more fierce, and then prices get higher. And even at a lower interest rate, if your principal balance is high, your payments could still be higher than they would be as the rates are today. And if you purchase today, you have the ability to refinance to that lower rate, but you can't change your principal balance once it's locked in. So I think that if people have the ability to qualify for a home loan today, they should be looking for homes today. If you have a need and the time is right for you, it's right for you based on the factors that you can control, never mind all the kind of noise that you get from everywhere else in the industry. And I think that there are, I'm sorry?
No, I was just gonna say, it's such a disservice, I feel like, to like home buyers, especially first-time home buyers, people out there like saying, oh, you're definitely going to be able to do this in this time, because it just sets their expectation, their brain, that they should be waiting for some unknown thing to happen at some unknown time, and then it puts them in that, like, I'm not going to move, I'm going to wait, and it just, they lose opportunities. It's just, it's sad, because
It is.
I mean, I feel like all the memes that are going around, like, date the rate, buy the house. It's so important because it's so true. Like, lock in your house price now, because what happened when we were in the midst of COVID, people were having to waive all their inspections. People were having to waive their financing contingencies, going hundreds of thousands of dollars over asking because the rates were low. It's just such great advice, Laura.
No,
I mean, I'll speak from personal experience. Oh, sorry, Laura.
Go ahead.
I'll just speak from personal experience to back this up. Like, my husband and I bought our house in May 2020 in Salem. And that was a terrifying time. And we were both like, we're having meltdowns right now, because even though interest rates were like 3%, so amazing, it didn't feel like a smart investment at the time. We were like, who knows if we're all going to be here in a couple months.
Right.
But looking back now, I'm glad we did it, and I think obviously, yeah, it's a risk, but it's a good investment. So if you can do it, like Laura said, I'll just back that up 1,000 times.
And we don't know what's going to happen. And so there's a lot of people who I have been working with for the last, 2 years, while rates have been increasing, that they started looking when rates were 4.25, maybe around 5, right? And they're like, oh no, the rates are too high, I'm going to wait for them to come back down to 3. And now they're looking for houses again, and they're watching their pre-approvals shrink, and they're saying to me, I can't believe I let that house pass me by. I can't believe I didn't do that. And it's sad. And what do I say to that? We have to focus on what we can control. And that's why it is such an individual and a unique, like, situation to be in. You can't let the numbers decide. You can't let the noise, the media, the things that you can't control decide. It's, if you can afford your monthly payments, if you've saved for your down payment, if you have a need for your family, if you're ready to put down roots in your community, if you have stable employment, stable job that's going to keep you tied to an area for the next maybe 3 to 5 years minimum, then you should probably be considering purchasing a home and not waiting for something that's completely outside of our control, that we don't know the if and when of when it's going to happen.
Yeah, I totally
and
100%.
And thinking about that, like, I know we've been talking a little bit about like the strategies in a competitive market. So when rates do come down, how people can leverage the strength of their offers to be compelling and even get considered. And something that I know I talk to my clients a lot about in terms of strategies, how to like manipulate down payments, manipulate things to cover things like appraisal gap. So Emily, how do you kind of advise to your clients when you're writing an offer, like, what percent they should put down, assuming they can do more than the minimum 3 to 5%.
I mean, I'll be honest with you, I mostly would call you and be like, Laura, like we've already had that discussion. I mean, because you're like, I've worked with you before and like, yeah, I I will say let's look back at what your discussions were with the loan officer. Um, and it's gonna go back to their financials. How much do they have saved up? That's gonna depend a lot. Also, are they doing FHA, which is a lower down payment? But if they're not doing that, if they can do 10, 15, 20%, I will always advise them if they can to do more because that's going to be better for them in the long run. And it does make it a more desirable offer. There are other little things we can do too. Sometimes, depending on the property, sellers offering credits, or they'll buy down your rate, or they'll do closing credits, or give you just a credit that you can use towards the down payment, which is amazing. And we're seeing more of those in certain sectors of the market. I am seeing more houses stay on, and people are offering like $10,000 or $5,000 to the buyer. And that's great. And so if you know that your down payment's probably going to be kind of low, that's something that we can look at too.
I want to clarify
Strategies.
something. I want to clarify
Mm.
something that you said, because let's just be clear that if they're offering $5,000 or $10,000 to the buyer doesn't walk away from the deal with cash.
Right. No.
Great
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
don't
That's a
walk away
good
with
point. Yeah.
cash.
No, that's not in your pocket. No,
Yeah.
that's going towards,
You can use it to offset your closing costs. So
Yep.
you can use it to fund your closing costs. So let's say your closing costs, for example, are $13,000, right? You only have to bring $8,000 then to closing, because you can apply the $5,000 credit that the seller gave you to your closing costs. The other thing you can do is you can use it to buy down your rate. And there's two different ways to buy down your rate to lower your payment. One is just a pure interest rate reduction buy down. In general, 1 point equals 1% of your loan value. So that's how much it would cost. And on average, it lowers your interest rate by about 0.25%. And that's over the lifetime of your loan. So if you have a 30-year fix, that full 30 years, unless you refinance, will be at that fixed interest rate. The other type of buy down that you can do is something called 2-1 buy down, a 3-2-1 buy down, depending on the length of time that it is. And the seller will actually fund the difference in your principal payment for the first 1, 2, or 3 years of your loan, depending on the term. So if interest rates are 7.75, and you have a 2-1 buy down, for the first year, your interest rate is 5.75. For the second year, your rate is 6.75. And for the third year, your rate is that regular 7.75, going all the way through the next 27 years of your loan. So those are really, really good strategies, especially for first-time home buyers who are concerned about things like affordability. It gives you time to actually see, okay, what is going to happen with the rates? Can we refinance before that full rate hits? Sometimes many first-time home buyers are at a point in their career where they might be growing exponentially. Maybe you're making a little bit more money in the next 2 years. And so even though you qualify for the loan now, your payments become more affordable over time as you continue to grow and save and develop in your career. So those are definitely really, really good strategies that I like to kind of like game plan on with people like yourself, to make sure that we're informing our clients, setting them up for success, and making sure that they're comfortable and able to afford things.
And on that note,
And would you say like, oh, sorry. But how does, right. So like, obviously, like you're saying, it's not just like free money, but it does affect their down payment then, right? Because we're restructuring depending on what, they decide to do, whatever the seller's offering, we can restructure kind of not their financials, but, would you say the buyers then are able to kind of look at their payment a little differently then, depending on if the seller is covering certain things?
Absolutely.
How much they put down?
Yes, of course, absolutely. And in general, over the course of your loan, taking a $5,000 seller credit and applying it to lower your interest rate actually makes more of a difference on your bottom line than taking that same $5,000 and using it to lower the purchase price.
Yeah.
It's just not gonna move the needle in terms of like your monthly payments and the overall affordability of the loan to lower it off of, I mean, because you think about it, a $5,000 savings spread across every single month, 360 months, 30 years, like it's just not a huge amount of money every month in your pocket. But being able to lower your rate, whether it's through a temporary buy down or a permanent buy down, absolutely will save you money every month in the long run.
And this is why I call you.
Yeah, well, this is why I think it's super important for viewers to kind of just understand, like, all of this back and forth and planning happens or should be happening with the professionals that you're hiring. So like, whenever we have maybe a negotiation of a credit as a result of inspection, like the first call we have is with Laura to say, like, what are the costs going to be? Because on the credit aspect, you can only have a credit, you can only use so much credit as your closing costs exist. So if you have 10,000 closing costs, you can't have more than 10,000 in a seller credit, because you use it or you lose it, essentially, is sort of the thought process. So it's important in that negotiation that Emily does to have that conversation with Laura to say, okay, what are our costs? What's our maximum? So we don't go into a situation where we lose a potential benefit. Or maybe we're going to increase the closing costs with the buy down. So we have a maximum of this now. So it's like all of this sort of behind the scenes action is super important. And that's why it's so great when there are professionals that sort of work together in this kind of way and collaborate with each other. And so I think having that team aspect with your professionals that you hire for buyers out there, with your realtor, attorney, and loan officer is super, super important. And I know we're kind of getting close to our 30-minute cap. We just wanted to like wrap it up. If maybe all of us wanted to say one quick last thing about who we are and maybe how they can get a hold of us.
Sure. I'm Emily Gonzalez. I'm a real estate agent with the Proper Nest Real Estate, based on the North Shore, but I go all over Massachusetts. You can follow me on Instagram, emilygonzalez.realtor, or you can email me, emily@thepropernest.com, and I would love to talk to you.
Laura, how you?
I'm Laura Barron with Cross Country Mortgage. You can follow me on Instagram at loans.with.laura. I would love to receive a direct message from you, or you can email me at laura.barron@ccm.com, and it's Barron with 2 R's.
Awesome. And I'm Liz from Liggerson Associates, real estate attorney. I'm on Instagram at LizBESQ or ebarletta@liggers.com. It was so awesome chatting with you, ladies.
Likewise.
I'm so glad you suggested this. I'm so glad you did this. Yes.
Yay. Well, have a great rest of your day.
You too.
Thank you.
Bye,
You both
everyone.
too.